Thank you.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Meenal, and I'm joining as a researcher from ITA's ASR team. Recently, we just closed this program at the end of September. We implemented a flood response project to recover foundational learning within 2 flood-affected districts of Sindh. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our findings, and we undertook some interesting surveys, and then I'll just discuss what we found and what it implies for education sector in general and also education in emergency contexts. So firstly, we can consider the problem. So as we know, Pakistan is very vulnerable to climate crisis, and it ranks as 5th in the Global Risk Index. And we know that climate risk is disproportionately higher for like vulnerable groups such as girls, children with disabilities, and also minorities. So recently, the floods in 2022 they caused devastating damage to the public school infrastructure in Pakistan, especially in Sindh. And we had around 34,000 schools all over the country which were severely damaged, and then 3.6 million children were affected, and they suffered from learning losses due to the disruption in education. So ITA implemented the Recovery for Foundational Learning project within 2 flood-affected districts in Ghotki and Shikarpur in Sindh. So the idea was to target schools that were either partially damaged or fully damaged, and then the children whose learning had been disrupted to help them recover their foundational learning levels, so basic literacy and basic numeracy. So initially, the focus was on emergency relief and recovery. But when we conducted the baselines, we realized that even the in-school children in grades 3 to 5 had very dismal learning levels. Their basic reading ability and their basic numeracy was very low. So even like we had the situation where we were conducting baselines and we found that more than 90% of the children could not read a sentence in English or read a story in Sindhi or do a 2-digit division in math. So, and of course, children who are lagging behind, they're at a greater risk of dropping out and, eventually becoming, adding up to the share of out-of-school children. So, we already know that the learning levels in Sindh were already lower even before the floods and even prior to COVID-19. So, as the ASR reports, the Annual Status of Education report that's a survey that's undertaken almost every other year. Before it used to be a yearly exercise, but now it's undertaken every other year. And we already know that even in Sindh, only 9% of the grade 3 level children could read a story in Sindhi, and 7% could do a 2-digit division. And these figures are from ASR 2021. So the solution was that we provide a learning boost by giving them a remedial education program, which is based on a teaching at the right level approach. And it's a 60-day intensive camp, learning camp, set up within the premises of public schools. So this is an intervention which has been tried in various like African countries, even in South Asian countries, and it has actually shown like really robust results. So we also implemented that, but in an emergency setting to recover foundational learning. But initially, our aim was to also have like 30% share of out-of-school children within our target beneficiaries. But we, when we conducted the baselines, we realized that it's the in-school children that really need a lot more focus. So we changed the targets somewhat, and we reduced the share of out-of-school children, so we could actually help those children who were already lagging behind before the new term started after August. So the program started from January until September, but we wanted to prioritize the in-school children first. So even though a lot of the research surveys that we did within the program, they were not planned, but because it's an emergency program, so there was not a lot of time to design research. So what we did was that we, along the way, we conducted various small studies just for the purpose of gathering more insights. So like I said, that we implemented a TAL-based program where the children were grouped according to their learning level instead of the grade that they were in. It had a lot of interactive activities, which are usually found in TAL programs, where there was a lot of game-based learning, use of songs and group activities, reading, writing, listening, speaking, practice. So. Okay. So that's the typical TAL cycle looks like. So we actually conduct a baseline in the beginning, and then in order to group students according to their learning level. And then halfway through the cycle, a midline is conducted, and then at the end, we conducted an endline survey to establish if the children had reached the highest competency level with regards to foundational literacy and numeracy. So for this purpose, trained para-teachers and hired them to conduct these camps within the public school premises. So in order to conduct the assessments, we used the ASER tools to test English and Sindhi reading ability. And then we used an international common assessment called ICANN, which is developed by PAL Network, to test basic numeracy skills of children. And of course, we developed TAL, guidebooks and reading material and school books for this purpose as well, especially for these accelerated learning camps. So these are just some basic results. So overall, we had 4 cohorts, and at the end of the program, we found that the share of children that could read a story in Sindhi increased from 3% to 47% at endline. And the percentage of children that could read a sentence in English increased from 2% to 63% at endline. And then the share of children who could do a 2-digit division increased from 3% to 44%. So overall, the boys showed a higher improvement than girls across all 3 subjects, which is expected because even the enrollment of boys is higher in the government schools within Sindh. So there are more out-of-school girls as well. So they were definitely more disadvantaged. We tried to boost the percentage of the share of girls within our schools, within our target schools. Although we don't see that, we didn't exactly close the gender gap, but overall the students showed a lot of improvement at the end line. So we do see that a greater percentage of children are now at the highest competency level within foundational literacy and numeracy. So we conducted a disability assessment as well because, in emergencies, disabled children are especially vulnerable. So we wanted to see, what percentage of our, beneficiaries were, faced with hearing, vision, mobility, self-care, communication issues. So earlier on, we only had binary data, which indicated the disability. But then we used the Washington short set of questions, which we adapted to check for 6 major functioning. And so we used that assessment within our project to figure out what the needs were of the disabled children. So we found that 10% of children with disability had a lot of difficulty walking. 7% had difficulty with self-care, 8% had difficulty being understood by others, 14% in remembering things, and 4% with seeing, 3% with hearing. So 80% of the children with disability did not use any assistive devices. 12% were using glasses, 7% were using mobility aids, and 1% were using hearing aids. So 34% of children with disabilities had at least one moderate to severe disability. And the breakdown of data on use of assisted devices shows that 61% who had one moderate to severe disability were without assistive devices and appliances. We also conducted a social emotional learning survey on the request of one of our donors. So the idea was that there had been some research which suggested that potentially TAL could boost social emotional skills because of its interactive and nature, and because of the group activities and game-based learning. So in order to measure the baseline and endline, we created a tool which we adapted from grid scale and the Melco direct assessment. And it covered domains such as literacy, interest, empathy, emotional awareness, fine motor skills, and oral comprehension. So we did not find any significant findings from the grid scale itself, because our intervention itself did not have the element of social emotional skills within the actual sessions that we were conducting, the trial sessions that we were imparting. But we did find some promising results for empathy and literacy interest, where we saw that children had improved their empathy scores, and also the way they perceived learning. And also for emotional awareness and regulation, we were able to record some improvement. So all of these are based on, we provide them stimulus sheets, and these scores follow the scoring rubric of these tools from which we have adapted these items. So just to maybe quickly go to the recommendations. So from this program, we learned a number of things that basically TAL could potentially lead to improvements in children's cell skills. So even though our program was not focused explicitly on cell, but we think that it could be beneficial in including it in accelerated learning programs that are using TAL-based learning, especially within emergency contexts. And also we do believe that mainstreaming TAL within teacher training could be beneficial to improve foundational learning within schools. So these are just the main takeaways. I won't take any more time. So thank you so much. So
thank you, Meenal. Some of these comments may be outdated because this was on an earlier draft, but I generally found the intervention really interesting, and so I'm coming from a point of view of saying how this could be maybe extended. So you said, for example, this is an emergence-specific response, and I'm wondering what kinds of emergencies it could be kind of extended to. So is it specific to floods? Is it specific to could it be extended to other emergencies, like even the COVID, where I think the motivation for a child dropping out or going in the labor force, et cetera, would all be different according to that shock. So That's the general crux of my comments, and I've kind of tried to distribute this between what I was wondering about the inputs and the infrastructure, as well as the outcomes that could be measured here, and then eventually the cost benefit, because I do have a bias as an economist. I think I couldn't help but thinking how this could extend and what would be the cost per pupil for some of these different interventions. So yes, so wondering about the selection. So how was the risk of dropping out? Because you said you did some evaluation early on, and how was that risk of dropping out evaluated? What were some of the measures that you used in that sense? You've looked at other outcomes. So specifically, once they finish this remedial camp, how many of the out-of-school children go to school in the first place or go back to school? How does this differentiate by gender, by the initial learning status? Do you feel from the results that you've seen that for these kids to remain in school, there may be some additional support needed to compensate, for example, their families for the loss of income? And as I said, the main thing that I was wondering about was how to extend this to other contexts, because this may be a way of just generally phasing students into formal education or any kind of education. So what would be a good way of thinking about the minimum duration that's needed, the cost of infrastructure, the cost of teachers, and so what should we think about the cost per pupil? I have some other minor comments, but I'll maybe discuss that with you afterwards.
Okay, so I can address the point about at-risk children. So we sort of, we take the indicator of the children being at risk as those who are within grade 3 to 5 within our program in our target schools, who were learning nothing. So they were at beginner level. So they were, you could imagine that they can not even read letters, who are at the letter level in English, and maybe they could maybe read letters, or maybe they could not read letters in Sindhi language, and then they are unable to. They are either at the number recognition level or even less in mathematics. So students who are in grades 3 to 5 and they are at this learning level, so we consider them at risk because they are not understanding what is being taught, and they are not up to speed to the curriculum of their grade level. So we take that as an indicator of them being at risk of dropping out, because eventually, of course, if they are unable to understand what is being taught, the classroom content is not, they are not absorbing it. So ultimately, they will drop out if they fail through primary schooling. So, and your second question about if this can be extended to other emergencies. This is tricky because, so as you know, with COVID, we would not be able to have this face-to-face, sessions, these trial sessions that we are conducting, for 6 days within the public school setting. So, maybe it's possible that this could be implemented through phone-based tutoring. I know that there are, across Africa, there have been applications where they have implemented TAL through phone-based tutoring and SMS interventions. So that could be one way of extending the same intervention, but using different means. Right. So that would be even more low cost, because then you don't need the premises. Yes, you would still need to train the para teachers or the teachers that you are using for the intervention, but because when you set up the camp, you also need to provide materials for the classroom as well. So we have these books, we have teaching guides and so on. We provided them with some kind of mat to sit on, and other materials that they could use for game-based learning. Right. So for example, we had these really interesting fake money or notes to play with so that they could learn how to add and subtract. So things like that. So replacing that element of the TAL camps would be really challenging.
Difficult, yeah.
Because over the phone, like if you're not providing the material support, and then everything is happening through phone-based tutoring, so I'm unsure how that element, I feel like that would be lost. So that fun element, how that would transfer through like phone-based tutoring.
But you mentioned this could be something like a summer school that other schools can employ.
Exactly. So, we thought that for us it was easier to carry out the program within the target schools, like that were damaged or partially damaged, but they provided us like a room within the premises, and then from there we could either enroll in school children who were lagging behind, and also other like out of school children from the community that was affected.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
So much. The floor is open to questions. So please.
I was curious that your intervention seems to show a huge increase in improvement in outcomes. Is that correct? Am I misunderstanding something?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. If that is correct, then this improvement is far greater than even anything to do with floods. So what is happening? What are you doing different that these children who are having such poor outcomes have now such a huge increase? What is the method? What is the difference in what you are doing and what was happening in the school before?
Okay, so we are only focusing on like foundational literacy and numeracy, so it's like extremely basic. So we're just teaching children how to read a sentence in English, or just how to read a story in Sindhi, or just do basic, math operations. And a lot of these children, like I said, a huge percentage of these children, I think around 89% are in school children within our program. So they are already within the schooling system. It's just that they are lagging behind, or they have not, learned how to read during their time at the school. Or, these are just simply students who are already at risk, but they have already been going to school. So we did not have a large percentage of out-of-school children who have never been, yeah.
Yeah. And this is a huge increase. True, they were eating, not learning. And there are other studies that show that children who are lagging, they don't benefit any longer from schooling because they don't have the foundational skills. So some intervention like this, which is just a summer school or something, can increase the foundational skills so much. This seems to be something which should be an integral part of any education program, nothing to do with blood research.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, we have just been using like teaching at the right level methodology, which has been implemented in, as you know, across the global south, and many countries have implemented this for remedial education, for remedial learning to boost foundational literacy and numeracy. So, and as you've said, like this has been adopted by SELD, which is the Sindh Education and Literacy Department. So they are actually training teachers so that they can use TAL within the classroom. So that is being done right now in Sindh. I think within Shikarpur and Gotki, they are actually training government teachers to also learn how to implement TAL within their classrooms. So it is not a part of the mainstream yet, but I feel that it is something under discussion and on the way.
With Meenal's permission, if I could add, so one of the biggest findings from the RISE education program, that Lan Pritchett was reading, was actually on TAL, in that you do away with these notions of classes in a regular school, and you look at where the child is with regards to ability. And there's quite a few papers, you've applied it in an emergency setting, which is fantastic, but there's quite a few papers that have come out that regular schools in India should be reorganized in a way that you do away with classes and you think about where the child is and how to bring them up. So those papers also and that evidence also got.
Yeah, I mean, this was the initially this has been a intervention which was developed in, I think, innovated in India by Pratham, and this has been sort of adapted in different contexts from there. So we follow one of the models that they had implemented by training para teachers and then having that implemented within a government school premises.
So I just one last question. Are your increases anywhere in line with what has been observed elsewhere? I've never seen anything of this side.
Okay, so this is, of course, like you said, so these are just like descriptive results. So these are not like, we have not done any impact evaluation because this was an emergency setting. So we were not able to, construct some kind of RCT or even, we tried to put together a quasi experiment by having some control schools, but we were not able to get the permission to, collect data during the summer because you need extra permissions. So we could not go through with that. So these are still, I would just give the disclaimer that these are like descriptive results. So these are just the results of the surveys that we did, like the assessments that we performed. But we cannot compare them to like, rigorous research, RCT research that, let's say, Pratham had done, or the other organizations have done. This is just, we are just reporting what we found, within our project. So I would not compare that with an RCT or some quasi-experiment because this is just the assessments that we carried out.
Thank you so much. We have another 2 questions.
Gee, thank you very much. I think a couple of very good questions asked by you. Sorry, I don't know your name.
Farah.
Farah. And we've been also thinking of coming up with a framework which could be used as a base for scaling these things up, right? So one of the contexts I think I'm familiar with is working with refugees. So there's a lot of learning, which you have in these extreme, exceptional circumstances, and what you can learn from there can very well be applied in one of the projects we're doing with refugees in Quetta, Afghan refugees, and some of these things you talked about has a potential to go in that direction and then sort of develop this framework where NGOs don't know what to do and how to do, and local teachers don't know what to do and how to do. And I think those informal but still very well designed summer camps or winter camps or 1 month long camps can be used. So I think that's a very interesting way to sort of take this model, develop it in a form of a framework and take it forward there. And I think second important thing which this model or anything else requires, and if you have an answer for that, is that you have this set of inputs which derive this whole processing of how people learn, and then what happens and how do you measure learning. And I see a lot of these measurements happening, and some of them support each other, and some of them actually don't support each other. So if you might be having, one scale might be telling that you've learned something, another scale should not actually work that well, right? They're contradictory to each other also sometimes, because you can't learn all the things all the time in a same socio-spatial, temporal spatial space. So I was wondering that, can you list down that if we have to do it tomorrow and you have to pick 1 or 2 measurements or 1 or 2 learning outcomes, how would you do that? Like, very, very basic thing, simple thing.
Thank you. There was another question right next to you. Shall we gather 2 and then?
Okay.
Thank you. It sounds like it was lots of fun, both from what you said and the images we saw. And we know that from post-disaster and also in a refugee context, child well-being is an important indicator of lots of other things. So I wonder if you have any reflections, A, on if you were to take this forward, how you might think about integrating the measurement of child well-being, and B, whether you have any kind of anecdotal reflections from implementing the program itself about its impact on child well-being.
There you
go. Okay, so, is there another question? Okay, sure. Can I start from his question and then? Okay, so yes, we did actually. I visited the camps repeatedly because it was from January till September in this year, and we noticed that there were children who were just completely bored of school and they had dropped out. But then when they brought them back into the school, they were actually very excited. So after the 60-day cycle, some of them did not want to, continue in their regular classes. They said that, okay, no, we want to be in the camp again. And we explained to them, no, you've already completed the cycle, so now you know how to read a sentence in English, or you know how to read a Sindhi story, so we need to, like, you know, enroll other students. But they really enjoyed the game-based aspect, and the fact that, you know, we had a lot of activities. We were teaching them, like I mentioned, through games, and we even provided them those fake notes that they could use to count money, and then how to subtract and how to add. They even did this game with the circle where they learned how to add and subtract. So these type of games were really interesting for them, and they actually wanted to continue in that type of setting. But of course, this was just for the 60 days and only you know, tailored to get them up to the like foundational literacy and numeracy level, and not beyond that. So we do have like case studies that I think are available on our website. If you would like, we could send those to you. Thank you so much. Yes, so I'm sorry I forgot your name. Suleiman, yes. So your question was about like what would be like the most important indicator, in my opinion, which should be measured. So I think one would be just the basic reading level in their language, their local language. So that would be like, you know, in Sindh's context, it's Sindhi. So whether they are able to read a story or a sentence in Sindhi, and then whether they are able to do basic math, let's say up to two-digit division. So if you are talking about grade 3 level children, so if they're up to, we can measure like whether or not their competencies are up to this level, and we can use like ASR tools for that, because those test the competencies up to grade 2 or 3 level. Within maths and also within Urdu, Sindhi, and English. So, and then I think another indicator that I would add to that mix would be, you know, a disability indicator. So we can figure out like what type of disability the target population, the target beneficiaries have, and then try to tailor our intervention so that we are able to also address their needs.
Thank you so much. In the interests of time, we'll move on to Farah's presentation, but please follow up with Meenal.
Okay, thank you, everyone. So I'm going to be presenting an impact evaluation from CAUSA experiment, looking at the long-run effects of secondary schooling for girls in Pakistan. This is joint work with Arina Musaddiq, who's now at Mathematica, and you know, we started this work when we were both PhD students. And 6 years and 6 institutions and 1 pandemic later, I'm finally presenting it to a local audience, which I'm embarrassed to say is you know, a lot of it is that I didn't present it here. So this is, you know, just to give you a brief overview of the motivation behind this, I think a lot of the discussion so far already gives this motivation, is on why women's schooling may be important. So, you know, health and access to health and education is a basic right, and women's schooling is often considered to be something that provides not only private returns, but also social returns in this aspect, in the sense that if women are more educated, so are their children. We also see some descriptive study that shows that fertility of women decreases, the maternal health increases, and then there are some intergenerational impacts as well. But these are mostly descriptive work, so we don't know if there may be some other things that may be improving both the welfare of the mother and education levels, as well as the welfare of their children. So there's recently now some causal work coming from RCTs and from mostly CAUSA experimental work from developing countries. So here I cite some papers from Ghana, Indonesia, Zimbabwe, etc. But the impact on the intergenerational impact is still not measured often. And this is kind of important because what has happened on the policy side is that with primary enrollment rates reaching almost 100%, at least pre-pandemic, policymakers are shifting their focus towards secondary schooling. And there they have to focus or weigh the costs of perhaps a higher cost of education against apparently minimal learning that happens at this level. So categorizing the longer-term impact, that's not just the impact on the girls themselves and whether or not they're educated, but the longer-term impacts of such policies become very important. So that's precisely what we try to do here. We exploit variation in secondary school stipends provided in Punjab. We try to measure the impact on female school completion rates as the first stage, but then we go on to look at teenage marriage rates, childbirth, during their teenage years, maternal health care utilization, and eventually the health of their children. This is a quasi-experiment that utilizes variation along 2 dimensions. The first thing was that this program was not implemented in all the districts of Punjab. This was started off with only those districts that have under 40% literacy in the census of 1998. For all girls between 6 to 10. Currently, this program has been expanded, but in our sample, there are only specific districts that had this. The second thing is that in our data set, we have women who, we have cohorts actually, not just women, but cohorts that vary in the age at the start of the program. So that means we have in our sample some women who live in the treatment district or districts where the stipend was provided, but they were too old to take benefit from that stipend themselves. And so along these 2 dimensions, this provides us with some level of estimating what we call a lower bound of the impact of this program. Right? So what we find, in case I don't have time later, in a nutshell is that each year of exposure to this program increases the probability that they finish schooling, both at the primary and the secondary level. It reduces the likelihood of early marriage as well as early birth. So here I'm showing you 16 and 17, but we've done this across different age groups. We also find that this increases the likelihood of seeking prenatal care, which already is very low in this country, but it increases it by a marginal amount. It reduces the likelihood of children being underweight and stunted. We have some suggestive evidence that shows that this may be driven by assortative matching in the marriage market with women who are more educated marrying slightly more educated men as well. And increased health awareness, that is more receptiveness to health knowledge, and empowerment of women. So when I say it's suggestive, it's because of the measures we have. Those are not perfect measures, but I'll show you in just a bit. Okay. So the study setting, I'm sure I don't have to tell anyone in this audience. So Pakistan is a country that performs very badly on most health and education metrics. It has the world's highest, second highest number of out-of-school children. We have good, I would say, just enrollment. I'm not talking about the quality of education, but we have high enrollment at the primary level, but it really drops at the secondary level. So only about 1 out of 3 girls are, 1 out of 3 girls are out of school at the lower secondary levels, that's grades 6 to 8, and about half of the girls are out of school at higher secondary levels, at grades 9 to 10. And over 80% of the girls from poor households specifically, talking about the theme of this conference specifically, is that in the poorer households, this is even worse. So girls from poor households, on average, have only 2 years of education or less. And this is obviously as a result of a lot of social and cultural norms, as well as a lot of other constraints, for example, access to safe transport. But it's also a matter of scarcity of schools on the secondary level. So according to one survey conducted by Tahir Andrabi and others in 2011, well, actually before 2011, only, where most of the households have primary school within walking distance, only about half of the households in Punjab have a secondary school within 15 minutes walking distance. And while there is an active private school market, this is mostly at the primary level. So about 90% of the private schools only offer primary education, and less than a third of secondary school-going children in Punjab are in private schools. The rest are in public schools. So this stipend program is actually quite relevant for the secondary school-going population in Punjab. The program is called the Female Secondary Schooling Stipend Program, or what we refer to as the FSSP. This is a conditional cash transfer, which is conditional on having a basic level of attendance in a particular semester. At the start of the program, which is where we start from, in 2004, the amount of the stipend was about $600 per semester. Or per quarter, actually, to female students enrolled in public secondary school. In 2004, this was about $10 US. And the amount was calibrated in a way that this would cover the cost of transportation, uniform, and textbooks. It wasn't a huge amount, right? So in terms of the data that we see from 2004, this is about only 3.4% of the median household income. So it's not an amount that would just, the receipt of cash itself is not likely to be large enough that it would just increase welfare of these households. We contend in our paper that this is actually the fact that these women were educated that's leading to some impact, not the cash itself. And then as I mentioned earlier, the program was conditional on where the women are living. So if their district is one of those 15 districts where the FSSP was first introduced, and their attendance in the public school, which is about 80% per quarter in grades 6 to 10. At the start of this experiment, well, not the experiment, the program, this was money that was given via mail, but currently it's via ATM, and also some parts, it's also mobile money. It's also been extended to a lot more districts than what we have at the moment in our study. So the data that we're using is MIX. It's the Punjab Multiple Indicator Cluster Survey done in 126 other countries with the primary goal of measuring MDGs. So we have information on schooling, on the age of marriage, on age of first birth, on maternal health care for women, and something which is unique to MIX, at least in the context of Pakistan, that it has information on height and weight of children under the age of 5 at a large scale. So this is the primary reason that we started to use MIX. What it does not have information on is whether the household specifically received the stipend. So what I'm about to show you is, as I said, we consider this to be a lower bound. This is the intent to treat effects. We would expect that the actual effects might actually be higher if we were to track people who actually receive the money. Right? So we estimate the ITT, the intent to treat effects. The variation is on two conditions. One, where the woman lives. So if she lives in a treatment district, so all those who don't live in those 15 treatment districts become part of the comparison group. But in addition, we also have some women who were too old by the time that the program was introduced. So again, women who were 16 or older in 2004 in the recipient districts also automatically become part of the comparison group. And in the treatment group, we have women in the recipient district aged 15 or younger in 2004, that is born between 1989 to 2002, with different years of exposure. And so these different years of exposure tells us, on average, per year of exposure, what is the impact of the FSSP. So here's what this basically would look like. Someone who's born in 1988 to 1990 in our sample has no years of exposure. So by the time that 2004 came and the program was introduced, these women were already too old to receive the stipend. But someone who was born in 1989 should have received the stipend. At the start of the program, this was not given to someone in grade 9 and 10, so they didn't. The first cohort that starts to receive the stipend in our sample is actually 1991. So women born in 1991 had 2 years of exposure, in 92 had 4 years of exposure, in 93, 5, and so on and so forth. Till 1998. When I say 10 years of exposure, it's essentially we're looking at literature, recent literature that shows that when women, or well, households receive stipend at the secondary level, it also frees up some of their resources at the primary level, or at least gives motivation for parents to send their children to school so that they can get the stipend later. So we're looking at full years of exposure. This is both primary and secondary grades. And this is a simple linear regression that we're running. We control for district, cohort, survey year, fixed effects. The outcomes we're considering is whether she completes the primary school, secondary school, average years of schooling, and later life outcomes, we're looking at whether she gets married before 16, has a child before 17, and the maternal health care utilization. And in the paper, we show that the age 16 and 17, we look at other age thresholds as well in a lot more detail. For children, we run a similar regression, except now we're looking at the mother's years of exposure, and we basically look at height for age, weight for age, and built from them, we look at the probability of stunting, of being underweight, and mortality. And so again, remember, when the first cohort that should see an effect is in 1991. And so I'm just going to show you the results that we see, but graphically, this is the completion of primary education. This is 1991. And as you'll see, if the FSSP had to have an effect, we should see nothing before 1991, and we should see positive effects afterwards. And this is indeed what we see. For both primary and secondary education, we start to see persistent positive effects, or at least, when I say effects, I'm saying this is a difference between the treatment and the comparison group post-1991. And this can be summarized in a regression. So on average, we're saying that the probability of completing primary increases by 0.8 percentage points, for primary by 0.6 percentage points, for secondary, and it increases the years of education by about 0.9. So not only does it increase the years of education, but as I showed you earlier, it delays early marriage, so they're less likely to get married within their teenage years, they're less likely to have a first child in their teenage years. When they do fall pregnant, they are more likely to utilize prenatal care. We don't see any impact on postnatal care, which again in literature has been shown as notoriously difficult to move as well. So we kind of, we're happy with this result, but this is not very surprising. And then finally, we see that improves child health as well. So the children of these women are healthier in both weight, height, and they're less child mortality also decreases. And then as I mentioned, we look at, in the paper we have a lot of these robustness checks, which, and in the interest of time, I'm going to skip, but we try to look at the mechanisms of these change. We don't have access to economic activity, so because we use mix, we don't know if the women were working, and because they were working, they had higher income, and therefore that led to some of this impact. What we know from literature, we don't expect that there would be an impact on the labor market outcomes, because we see that between the primary and secondary level, the returns to education is not very different, and other studies from other contexts have shown that it actually doesn't increase the labor market participation. But that's what we know from other studies. We can't test that in our context. What we can look at are things that mix does measure. So we can look at whether or not these women are marrying more educated men. And so collectively, if this is leading to greater allocation towards health of the children. If these women are more knowledgeable about health practices in general, and so once they hear about child immunization, perhaps they're more receptive to that information. And if they have more empowered attitudes in general within the household. And we see support for all three of these channels. So here is the first one is basically we see that these women are marrying more husbands. Their husbands also are more likely to have completed secondary education. So they're marrying more educated men. They have greater knowledge. This is the only question we have from mix. So they have greater knowledge of HIV/AIDS as a proxy of general health knowledge. These are some interesting questions that Mix asks about whether the woman thinks it is okay for a husband to beat his wife if certain things happen. And so here I'm showing, and again, this is the way, I don't know why they put this question this way, but it's asking, do you think your husband is not justified, or a husband is not justified in beating a wife if she neglects child, goes out, et cetera, and all of these aspects. The women who have secondary education through the FSSP are less likely to say yes, right? So they have apparently more empowered attitudes. So this is basically what the study is about. We find robust short-term effect. These are very much in line with what other studies have shown. For example, in Bangladesh, there is a very similar program, except that it has stricter conditions. So in addition to attendance, they also have conditions about the quality of education, so you have to have certain marks. It also had conditions about whether or not the girl is still unmarried. So if she's married, she doesn't receive those stipends. But our results are almost the same as the results in Bangladesh, despite the fact that our conditions in Pakistan are just about attendance and nothing else. We find long-term effects of the CCT program, which is basically they delay early marriage and delay early childbirth. They use more maternal health care, and their children are healthier. And we think this is because of some matching in the marriage market with them marrying more educated men, having greater knowledge about health practices, equitable gender attitudes, et cetera. And so really this paper is a pitch to kind of look at these long-term impacts in more detail. We tried to get some cost-benefit analysis again for this. It turns out the government doesn't keep a record of who's getting the money when, especially it doesn't get a record of, or at least it doesn't share those records of The costs, the infrastructure costs that the government may be having in terms of just sending that money to the household or keeping records or someone sending in the attendance record, et cetera, et cetera. So we weren't able to do that cost-benefit analysis, but from the government's own reports, in about 3 or 4 years after the program was actually implemented, these costs are about $200 per year per individual, which, if the long-term benefits are to be counted, make it seem like it should be an easy equation. It should be something that should be done more of, and perhaps that's what the government is doing by actually expanding this program substantially now. So I'll stop here, and happy to take any questions, comments. Sorry, I have these slides. Go ahead. The stipend has been increased by 4 times. And so it's now a substantial amount of money that's going out to families. And so now if you were to see, then, even by years of exposure, because now it's almost universal, but if you see just by the years of exposure, and there are some, if people want to do this, I don't have funding to do this, but if people have funding, it would be really nice to see, because it's almost like a nice RDD by attendance and by a poverty score. There are certain families that are getting this money, certain families aren't, and have just the voicing, as you say, of norms changed, has a negotiation changed, has a labor market changed in that sense, would be really interesting to see. I agree, yeah.
Everybody who gets this money could be any school. It's not a government school.
It is a government school. It is a government school, yes, yeah.
So we're doing this qualitative work, Sarah, where the framework is exactly that. So we're looking at people who graduated 10 years and 12 years, and looking back at the kinds of negotiations they did. And we're differentiating between what you wanted, what your parents wanted, and what you actually did. So we can share that with you. Perhaps
That would be nice.
Your behavioral.
Yes, and then we can apply for funding. Yes.
If there are no more questions, Ji, I'd like to thank all our presenters very, very much for a very exciting panel. Thanks very much for attending.